Welcome to On the Bench. I'm your host for this episode, Brendan Sinone. Why am I so happy? I don't know. There's nothing to be smiling about right now. FSU is 1-6 heading into Miami Hate Week. Yay. Come on, guys. Let's get excited.
I can't even drum up good old-fashioned hate for Miami. Sorry.
Do you hate Miami, Zach?
I'm indifferent.
It's kind of doing it to us.
I'm not beating the allegations. No, I don't. It's just a meaningless week. Thanks, Florida State.
It dawned on me. So we haven't all been together since I think before the Duke game. But at Duke, it's a really pretty campus, old cathedrals and stuff like that, and it's surrounded by the woods. Like there's legitimate like forest all around Duke's campus, and that kind of backs up into the football stadium. Football stadium then goes to their practice field, which goes to a field house that goes to the woods, and that's where the away team goes, and that's where they stay, dress. I don't know, whatever. And so you basically have to walk more than 100 yards to go to and from the field to the locker room at halftime before the game. It's a long walk. And I just thought metaphorically, guys, after FSU lost 23 to 16 against Duke, and it's getting really cold out that night. And it's a long walk to the rest of the season because you're just barely midway through this disastrous. I described it as a forgettable campaign. But someone said we should never forget this campaign because this season is full of awful memories that you need to learn from if you're trying to get to a better place. So we're going to try to push this through a little bit and kind of keep trying to get there. FSU will be a 20-point underdog when it faces Miami on Saturday evening. If I'm Mario Cristobal, I'm trying to hang 100 on Florida State. I don't know. It's a 20-point spread, and FSU has only scored over 20 points once this season. You know how many other teams have scored over 21 points per game or 21 points in a game this season?
All of them.
All of them. FSU is the only team in the country to not score over 21 points in the game. So this is all depressing. This isn't great. This is truly. Remember when people were mad at us for saying that this team wasn't going to win 8 or 9 games, or that they weren't going to win 8 or 9 games, to say we overhyped them? I feel so much better now. It's like, we weren't just off. Like everyone in the entire world was off about this team. I do feel a little bit of relief on that. This has just been this indescribably atrocious season of miscalculations and misevaluations and misexpectations. And we could probably spend 3 hours on a podcast, and maybe we will at the end of the year, of like what went wrong, because the laundry list is just unfathomable.
All of it.
Everything, like everything has gone terribly. So we start looking towards the future, right? I think at this point, like that's all you really can do. And there's gonna be things throughout the rest of the season, because Duke kind of felt like your last stand. Not that you're going to turn things around drastically, but like, what would Brock Glenn look like, with actual weeks to prepare for a game, and what kind of growth could he show from one start to the other, and throw 3 turnovers in 3 plays. And you see Luke Kromenhoek, and he throws a couple dimes, and those are dropped, and he has issues with pocket awareness, and like there's just no elixir right now. But so you're trying to see like what you have, I guess, through the duration of the season to kind of build on. But ultimately, like the fan interest, the listener interest that you guys have is towards the future. And I think that's what this episode is going to be about. So you kind of have to see, like, you're going to have to wear it this weekend, and see if you can beat UNC, maybe beat Charleston Southern too, and see if you can scrounge up 3 wins. And that's kind of what we're looking at this point. So gents, the future. Want to take some listener questions about things that are spinning forward? Does that sound fun?
Sure.
Okay. So I asked for some listener questions. I want to have some of my own that I'm going to kind of sprinkle in here as well, but let's just kind of start looking towards 2025, if we will. I can't believe it's only October. PC Seminole, who are players on this roster that must be retained? So I'm going to reframe it like this. Who are 5 players, 5 that you can all pick, that FSU needs to have on its roster in 2025?
You want to 1-1-1? You want to do that deal, Zach? So you can start and pick your first one.
Is this like a draft format?
Sure, yeah.
I'm over draft formats. Gosh,
Shut
darn
up,
it.
Brendan. Go ahead.
Too bad you're not in charge.
That Kevin Knowles in the team draft was a pretty sneaky good last pick. I'm just saying.
I'll go. We need to revisit that, by the way. See who won.
No, we don't. We really
Nobody
don't.
won.
We all lost.
Luke Kromenhoek is my first pick. I think
Good answer. Good answer. That would be my first pick too. I'm proud of you, Zach.
Yeah, I think he's your quarterback, and I think he displayed that against Duke. He can make those big time throws. I know consistency is a thing that he's going to have to get better at, like any true freshman quarterback. But you could see it in that performance that he has the tools to go and be a big time quarterback at this level. So I'm excited to see how he develops, and I think he's the most important young guy that you need to keep on this roster heading into next season.
I'm going to go with tight end Landon Thomas. It's a position FSU hasn't been able to recruit at that high of a level, and he is a young man who is at a high level. He catches the ball, which for people in this offense is always a task. He's also a capable blocker. I think he's an important piece. I think he's a guy who can be a big-time player down the road.
I know who Zach is going with his pick here.
You don't. Wait, is it true freshman or
no, just young
anyone.
guys.
Yeah, they can retain
multiple year guys.
Okay. Trying to think of what I want to build my roster around. I'm going to go, and this might surprise you, Andre Otto.
Okay.
I think that it's important for them to build a nucleus of high school offensive linemen that they've built up throughout, multiple years in this program. And he's the one that's shown the most promise. And I think that's evident because they've played him a good amount early on in his second year of college football. So, yeah, I'll go Andre Otto. I think he's going to be an important piece for them moving forward along the offensive line.
I think Blake Nicholson's the linebacker with the higher ceiling, but I'm actually going to go with Juice Cryer before I would say Blake Nicholson, solely because this team desperately needs leadership, and he's one of the few people that I feel like exhibits qualities that fit that. He's also turned into a dependable, good player who is going to help him long term.
He's been so solid for them, the way he communicates, and you see these like flashes of athleticism.
He cares.
I don't understand why he doesn't start all the time. He started in place of Blake Nicholson this past week.
How much time did you carve out for bad personnel decisions this year? Because that could take a while.
That would be on the list. Justin Cryer, Juice's, I'm pulling it up now, your number one ranked defender on PFF, 76.1.
And he's like been a consistent, it's not like up, down kind of thing. Like he's always pretty consistently in that like 70-ish range.
The Cal and Memphis weeks, he had 57 grades, but still, that's not all. He hasn't had a dud of a game, and you've had some duds at linebacker this season on Georgia Tech game. Yeah.
I will go Amari Williams because
that's who I thought you were going to go.
I think he's going to be important, whether he finds his place at tight end or at D end. I know that he works some at D end for them still. As he tries to learn both positions, but obviously playing tight end primarily this season because they need more help at that spot, arguably. But he's a young player that has really impressive athleticism for his size, and I think that if you look at the roster outlook, especially for the D line next season, I mean, they could definitely use some talented bodies there with what they could lose this offseason. So, I think there's value at multiple positions for him. So I'll go Amari Williams.
I'll go safety KJ Kirkland next up. Competitor, good athlete. He's a kid who I think is going to continue to improve over his career as he gets more and more experience. They've really not been very good at safety this year, consistently at least. There's been good moments for Shaheem Brown. There's been good moments for KJ Kirkland. Kevin Knowles is a nickel, but he's had good moments too. But some of the other members of that group, not so much. So I'll go with Kirkland as a younger guy in that group who I think has a shot of being a very good long-term player for them.
I'll take Blake Nicholson because I think he's probably the other linebacker that you invest in long term. I think he's got a higher athletic upside than Juice Cryer, but I do love Juice Cryer's leadership ability, like Chris mentioned. And yeah, I mean, if you can keep him healthy, I mean, I think he's probably the most talented linebacker in that room. So yeah, that's my pick.
I'll go Wheezy. Lewayne McCoy, wide receiver, would be next for me. You got to have one. You got to figure out who in that young group at that position is somebody that you want to work on building in the future. And definitely seems like McCoy's the guy that's earned the most trust within the program.
He's legitimately been good at punt return, he's been good at fielding.
He's getting better. Yeah, he's safe with the hands. The returns themselves have to get better. JP talked about that on Sunday. Make the first guy miss, get north-south. You know, his 7-yard return against Duke was FSU's longest punt return of the season. Hey, their longest rush of the season belongs to Kyle Morlock. So we got stats, boys.
Dude, when you pulled that up on the instant reaction, I couldn't believe it.
No, it's so good. That's what the instant reaction's for. That's probably a top 5 instant reaction moment, along with Josh's WTF special teams coming back from Clemson in 2020, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2019.
One of those years.
Man, we've been through it, haven't we, guys?
We have. Yeah, my last pick was going to be one of those freshman receivers.
Free BJ.
Oh. What?
Nope.
Oh.
Calm down.
I'm going to go. Does Quindarius Jones count?
Oh, I was gonna say Dane was gonna lose his mind if neither of you guys picked QJ.
Yeah, I had Dane like in the back of my mind. You know, I'm just screaming Quindarius Jones' name. No, I think he's probably the future at corner for you. You know, he's an aggressive cornerback who obviously has had his moments this year. And I think if you can get him to play with cleaner technique, I mean, I think he'd be a really, really talented cornerback. And he's kind of like on that AZ trajectory of, you know, being a younger player that's seeing, you know, more reps and will probably assume a starting role next season. So I think that's a good last pick.
My last pick would be DT KJ Sampson. Not effort guy, shows it consistently in practice, starting to come on a little bit more. You know, it'd be nice if they can rotate him in there a little bit more, you know, give him an opportunity. I think he would take to it very well. So you got to have a building block there on the D-line. They don't have a whole lot of them.
Do we miss anyone?
Yeah, I mean, there's a sprinkle of other guys I can think of. Some are the potential types of the world, the Elijah Moore types, who haven't yet done it, but we know are talented and capable. Others are maturity issues. Hello, my boy Conrad Hussey. And others are guys like a Daniel Lyons, who's a little bit older but got multiple years, and again, a premium position where you're going to need somebody to return to your team who can give you good quality snaps.
Yeah,
those are some I thought of.
That tier of guys who have been like decent, reliable, either rotational or starters, and granted there haven't been a ton of them this year, but like that tier of guys, like how do you go about retaining them, I guess, or like what's their interest level in coming back for another season? So Daniel Lyons comes to mind. Like let's say like then you get down to like let's say Shaheem Brown or Marvin Jones Jr. or guys who had some NFL draft aspirations who've probably hurt themselves, or not probably, they have probably hurt their, no, I can't stop saying probably, don't qualify it, Brendan, who have hurt their draft stock this year. I don't think like Patrick Payton or Josh Farmer would have done it enough to not be taken. But Darrell Jackson's another one to where, yeah, that's probably a day 3 guy now just based on upside, but had a chance to be a day 2 and that hasn't materialized. So like Azaria Thomas, another one who was like a day 1-ish type of prospect and now maybe a day 2. What do you do with those guys? Do they want to come back? Do you splurge to pay them the market rate if they decide to go elsewhere? I think that's an interesting part of what's coming up this off season is how you go ahead and retain players, something that you've really valued and you've allocated a lot of time and energy and money towards to being good at in the last few years. But like this season's been so disappointing. Like, do you want an overhaul culturally? I don't know. I don't know how you go about doing that. I think that's going to be an interesting part of late November and into December. How many players do we think exit the program?
Well, you threw out the stat a few pods ago where it's been an average of about 22 over the
That
last few
sounds right.
years.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it ends up being in that ballpark. There's some who leave because they're not going to play here. The Jarrell Powers of the world come to mind, for example.
Damn.
But there's also some what?
Just
No, he's
catching
not going
strays.
to.
He's
But he's
not
not
going to
going
play here.
I know.
Oh.
Just Jarrell Powers catching strays.
Sorry, man. 1 in 6 does it to a man. And then there's the types that you'd like to keep or you'd at least be interested in keeping who opt to go elsewhere. So, yeah, I think the average probably sticks to being the average.
I've thought about this, Chris. There's no way it's not 30.
Man, you're just thinking it's going to bottom out.
I mean, all right. So my thought process is you're going to have more disgruntlement than you've ever had, right? I mean, that's just 1 in 6 does it to a man. So you're going to have that as a dynamic that you're probably accounting for. You're going to have to be doing a lot of self-reflection as a program of who's part of the answer, who culturally you're feeling good. There's some guys you're probably going to be okay exiting, and then even just look at like the transfer cycle that you just had. How many of these guys, we documented how poor it's been from you from a production standpoint. How many of these multi-year guys this is something that you prided yourself in is taking multi-year transfers and developing them. How many do you want to continue to develop and allocate time into? Like who's good culturally that you feel like you have to keep or from a talent perspective is going to get you where you want to go. So I think you're like, and then you have freshmen who we know are like, there's a free them youngins movement that's been public. Like there's a disgruntlement among some underclassmen as well who haven't played. And we'll see what that looks like, in the final month and a half of the season. But you're going to see probably more attrition than you would normally see from a freshman class. So no, I think we see someone asked me on the board a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, oh, probably a dozen and a half or so players. And the more I thought about it, like no, it's probably gonna be 30, maybe more.
Where do you land, Zach?
Maybe 40. Honestly,
Yeah, I think it's going to be higher than the average. I think it's going to be higher than the average we've seen for sure. I think a lot of it depends on. I mean, I agree with Brendan. This is, and I'll add this. Like, I think this is the first off season where you really don't have all that much leverage besides NIL money, and a lot of teams are going to be willing to spend in the portal, especially for some of your younger, talented players who have, especially the ones that have shown promise on the field. So yeah, I think that there's going to be a good amount of attrition because of that. Like you're not going to be able to kind of sit there and be like, well, hey, we're going to win with or without you. Like you kind of had that mindset in the last few portal windows because that was going to be true, like that you were going to win. So I think that's going to cause for some failed negotiations, and other schools are definitely not going to make it easy on Florida State to keep some of their younger talented players. So yeah, I could definitely see where it gets in the 25 plus to 30 range of exits.
When I set up to 40, I guess I'm also counting like NFL guys too. Some early departures there as well, but like the overhaul is going to be immense. How many transfers or how many new players do they bring in this past year? Like
39. I think it was 39. 22 in the high school class, if I recall correctly off the top of my head.
Like
17 transfers.
That you're probably, if you recall at the top of your head, you know damn well exactly what it is.
I mean, I think that's what it is.
I'm pretty sure that's exactly what it is. Yeah, if not close.
But you got to remember, you had, 12 end up in the NFL last year is partly why that number was high. And then you had, about 24 departures otherwise. So,
yeah, I think the incoming class between transfer, you're going to be looking at about half the roster looking different, I think. If that doesn't happen, real quick, if that doesn't happen, if it's not this total overhaul, is that, like, to me, that would be alarming if it's not. So I think that kind of is what this season points to needing, is that there has to be a changing of the guard.
I think there's a degree of draw the line in the sand and see who's on what side. with regards to your comment, Brendan. The thing I would add is that because you're only going to have so many actual departures that are guys that should be departing in the sense of go on and do something better with your life, playing football at the next level. That number is lower compared to last year. I think you start running into a situation where because you have such a small high school class, it sits at 11 right now or 12, and you've got concerns about a couple of those sticking. So you're talking about high single digits to 10 roughly. You're going to be in the filling out your roster just to fill out your roster phase, and I don't know if that's the best place for them to be because, again, lack of leverage. What are you selling? How much are you willing to overpay? Because that might become the proposition you have to deal with because, well, you're going into year 6 and you're coming off a dreadful year. I think there's a lot of dynamics at work where, like, if there's a guy who you think contains some value to you, both in 25 and potentially beyond, that there's got to be a legitimate effort to retain that person within reason.
Zach mentioned he was talking about transfers coming in and kind of the messaging that FSU had last offseason, join us or lose against us kind of was something that Mike Norvell even said publicly, I think around signing day.
He also said it like last week.
Oh, in the RG3 interview? Yeah.
I don't know when that was filmed, but I think it was during.
I mean, it seems like it was during this season. One dynamic to keep an eye on is last year they thought they would get somewhat of a, I don't know if a discount is the right word, but like that they would get interest and they would not have to be the highest bidder maybe for some of their top targets. And we talked about that in real time back in December during the first week or week and a half of the portal window. So they miscalculated there. They thought they would get that luxury, and that's not something that really existed for them to the extent that they thought. That was coming off of 13 in one season, kingmaker in the transfer portal over the last 2 years. Now, what do we think that's going to look like? Because you're not going to have that luxury afforded to you at all. Beyond that, like I would have concerns that FSU is going to be able to even being the highest bidder on some of this stuff. Like how agents are so prominently involved in transfers now. That's been development the last year or so. Like what agent's going to rightfully send their player who's got another year or so left of eligibility, looking to maximize on that for the NFL future? Who's going to send them to Florida State coming off of this season? That's something you're going to have to combat, and that's, I think, something that we're going to continue to talk about is why you're going to need to probably have an infusion of coaches in this program. Is you have to find ways to recruit different sort of talent, and that's the quickest way to do it is to go ahead and get guys who have relationships with other recruits or players around the country that give you some new blood. And that brings me to a question, and this is something I talked about. Dane and I were talking about the other day. I'm going to find the question here. Let's see. All right. Sorry. There was a question here and I didn't put it down. This is good podcasting. But basically, like what would new hires mean, I guess, for an infusion of like energy standpoint? Someone asked about momentum in the thread, and like how can you go about getting momentum coming off of a 2-win season?
All right. I mean, I think so. This is a much larger discussion. I think one interesting thing that could provide a jolt or a change is Mike Norvell giving up play calling duties and hiring an OC. You hired a right OC, it brings excitement with it. Mike Norvell changing a bit, I think, brings a bit of a narrative change for what that's worth. Might not be worth a whole lot, truthfully. I think that's one of those interesting areas. My concern with the coaching change is because the calendar has changed in early signing days, now the first week of December, that you do not get any high school bump at all in the current class with regards to that. So it's still portal haunting, and we know that's a greed factor and financial factor. So I'm not sitting here saying I don't think they need to make coaching changes. I certainly think that they need to shake up their staff. But I also don't think the bump is what it once was back in the day when it bought you 2-3 months of sort of fresh blood, new recruiting for the current class. I don't think that exists much anymore. And
Yeah,
I'm sure somebody listening right now would say, well, that's why you fire him right now. Sure, but you can't hire somebody right now.
You have to hire someone too right now. But you can get that groundwork going, I guess, if that's what you like.
Yeah, but if you're telling a kid, hey, we intend to hire so-and-so for this position, and then 4 weeks go by and the agent's like, well, we want more money than you originally said. That's not going to happen. Well, you just lied to the kid. That doesn't work out. There's those kind of dynamics with it all. It's tough to tell somebody something exists till it actually exists.
Fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think the momentum is largely going to come, hopefully, from coaching change. I think, at least from the fan base, like that's going to be something that's super welcomed because, we've talked about it at length, how it's necessary. And I think what Chris brings up is an interesting point, right? Like I remember it's not apples to apples, but when Willie Taggart hired Kendall Briles, there was some sort of excitement around that. And that dynamic of him coming in and trying to revive the lethal simplicity offense. But like I do remember covering recruiting back then, and they're us asking about Kendall Briles, and they're seemingly being a legitimate I don't know if you want to call it like a super real momentum, but it was some sort of jolt at that time.
Didn't they have like a top 10 class going into that season, into 2019? I think they had a good foundation after they got like Jalen Knighton, if I recall correctly. So I think they're
Booster. Sorry.
Yeah, they had a solid class. It wasn't like the year before where they were in position to land so many other like high end guys, but they had done a solid job. And yeah, I mean, I think I don't think Kendall Briles was like some recruiting mastermind, but he, there was some kind of like optimism that the offense could be better. And I think, we talked about, I think a few weeks ago about like the possibility of like a guy like Brendan Marion coming in and bringing the go-go offense. I'm not trying to say that that's like going to happen. It's a possibility, but I could see to Chris's point why that would be like exciting, right? Like it's a completely new scheme, and there'd be a lot of fun things to cover when it comes to just the change in philosophy offensively for them. And I know that would be something you could point to as opposed to other coaches being able to negatively recruit FSU's offense over the past year and the inefficiencies of it going into the previous season. But I think if you bring in a new offense that has had success recently, like a Brendan Marion at UNLV, it's harder to negatively recruit that. So I think that would be another way to create some momentum. What about you, Brendan?
Real quick, it was Cosjunk 517 who had asked, and I had it right in front of me. I just didn't read it correctly because the season's slowly killing me on the inside. Asking about momentum. I agree with what your guys' points were, so I don't have a whole lot to add to it. But just like one point that I thought of, Zach, that I want to make when you were talking about Willie Taggart and momentum with recruiting back then, is I remember very vividly it dawning on me some point in 2019. I think it was coming back from Clemson, so midway point of that season, towards the end of that tenure, and realizing like, oh, Willie's in a vicious circle right now that he cannot get himself out, cannot get out of his own way as a coach, and there's not enough happening in the development aspect of the program on Saturdays to sell on the recruiting trail. And you've lost at that point all your momentum on the recruiting trail, and you looked at what that class was becoming, it was falling apart. And so he was going to be in this vicious cycle of just not being able to get out of it and to overturn it. Like that was done. and I've said this before when talking about some of FSU's rivals the last couple of years, like Mario Cristobal and Billy Napier at their respective schools, when you're losing on the field and momentum is fleeting. Like the one thing that I guess you have is how have you recruited and what talent do you still have on deck to sell to boosters, to fans? Like what level of optimism do you have? And that's where like I get worried about the future with this program and with what's happened with Mike. Well documented at this point, the high school recruiting has not been to the standard that Florida State needs. And you were probably going to level up and take a jump this year if you had a good season, and that hasn't happened. And so the best class you've had is a top 12 high school class, and that's by far your best. And so you look at what Billy Napier has at Florida right now, and they're floating around 500, and he's still doing similar mistakes that he's always had, and they just beat Kentucky, so there's some feel good there. But they have a promising 5-star quarterback who they're playing that, if push comes to shove and he's around 500 at the end of this, like that might buy him another season, the potential to keep a DJ Lagway. Mario Cristobal, if they didn't recruit at the high school level that they did the first couple cycles, he was going into probably some level of a hot seat going into this year anyways, and obviously it's worked out really well for them for the calculated gambles they took, and it's paid off well. But he had some leeway going into the season because of the high school recruiting. That all matters, and this program just doesn't have that, and I don't know how it gets that right now without making a bunch of hires or whatnot. I mean, does that make my outlook is bleak because of that, I guess.
From a high school perspective, I look at it simple. To date, they've had 43 kids in for official visits. The vast majority of those were in June. They have 12 commitments. Feel confident they probably retain roughly 9, maybe 10 of those. That's a really poor hit rate.
Yeah,
that's just matter of fact. And they brought in really high quality kids. And you can splice that conversation further and talk about, positions that mattered to them where they wanted to get high quality high school prospects. D tackle, they had 2, they lost 1, they're battling to keep 1. If they lose that one, I don't know who they get that matches the quality they once had. D end, they at one point felt confident that they were going to get 2 to 3 high quality kids. They currently sit, in a bad position at that spot. Linebacker, we've had a whole podcast about that. But, 0 for 3 basically with the 3 that they brought in over the summer. They do have Ethan Pritchard committed at the position. It's stuff like that where like you can't keep adding up losses like that. And I know the portal exists and they believe they can go rectify that way at some point. And I think they would share this internally. They want to build through high school as much as they like adding through the portal. And this year they're going to fail to build through high school. And that's a concerning thing when you project down the road.
Yeah, it is. That's when you start looking at our outlook and you're projecting like how it gets fixed. Like that, there are not a lot of great options. With coaches, and we got a lot of questions about coaches, and we'll get into some of those. But so we talk about like security for different assistant coaches, and talk about what outlook, what future looks like. I think there's 2 things that are really important if you're Mike Norvell and you're judging like who can help you, who can be part of the solution, part of the answer after this colossal failure of a season. Whose position group is performing well? That was almost an unfortunate slip. Whose position group?
That probably was a bad slip there, sir. Probably.
At least I didn't combine the 2. Whose position group is performing well? And the answer to that is you're 1-6, so not many right now. But then 2, like what are the prospects of the future, right? What do you have coming back? Who do you have a good relationship with? Who are you bringing in? And you look across the board right now, like quarterback feels like one where there's some bright future stuff there, both in terms of high school and on the field. Offensive line class currently, on the field has been a bitter disappointment for what they thought would be the best offensive line they've had in their tenure here, and it has been perhaps the worst. But you have a really good high school class right now. assuming that Solomon Thomas sticks, and that's probably going to be a big pivot point for like what happens with Alex Atkins, I would imagine, is if you can retain him or not. But like outside of that, guys, like your wide receiver class is falling apart. Tight end, Zach's reported that. What was the quote that Chase Lofton gave you, Zach? It was
I asked Chase Lofton whether he had any visits scheduled to other schools, and he said no comment on that.
Defensive end, defensive tackle, linebacker, defensive back. Like, so point being is that there's not a whole lot in the chamber right now for you to be able to sell.
They've done okay. DB's better than the prior positions mentioned on defense with recruiting.
Yeah, right now. Yeah, because you have Zay Thomas. Forgot Byron Lewis at running back, but like point being like that, how many of these position groups are like top tier, nationally? Probably offensive line is it right now.
And to me, some of it's satisfying needs that you have with what you're going to lose because of veteran players on your roster. And D-line's the first one that comes to mind. We'll obviously see what Pat Payton does, but Pat and Byron are kind of your primary two. And, you're playing that long-term game with Marvin Jones Jr., but returns to date haven't been good with regards to him. Does the potential exist that he can be better? Certainly. But that's a position where you at some point you got to stack a couple really good youngins and hit on one of them, and they didn't. And you can't keep doing that. You're literally sabotaging your own future when you're coaching a team and you fail to recruit at a proper level.
One question we get from Jasu, Georgia Southern, and one was asking if it's hot board season. We've had a couple hot board season questions. Like, no, not until coaches are fired. I find that I don't know if that's a great exercise. Although I guess we've mentioned Brennan Marion, but like that's more of a big picture deal of something that could help Mike Marvell out. But anyways, is there any reason to suggest that we'll see some moving on from coaches in season like other schools have done this year? So there have been a handful at this point. I think 3 or 4 coaching changes, most of them on the offensive side of the ball. Oklahoma's OC stepped down. Purdue fired their offensive coordinator about a week ago. So we're getting to be that time of the year. I feel like we would have seen it after the bye week. If there wasn't a change after scoring, how many offensive points did they score against Duke? 11
offensive points.
9 offensive points.
Technically, offensive score. I mean, they kicked 3 field goals and they had a kick return.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen changes yet, I don't know, man. Like I don't think that's what Mike's going to do. If it is late in the year.
I agree. I think it would have been during the bye week because it's the middle point of the season. Gives you 2 weeks basically to adjust to how you operate without that person still incorporated into the order of the hierarchy. A complete and utter embarrassment in a game like Miami just absolutely annihilating you, not just beating you, just downright full-blown embarrassment level loss.
That could
or Charleston Southern, because the strings played out, you're already pretty much at the end anyways. I could see something happening. I do not expect something as of right now to happen in that manner.
That is a point I want to make real quick, Chris. I think I wrote about it on Friday morning. I don't know if we talked about it in the podcast format yet. The impetus for change, I guess there's still room for, like, we expect change. We've talked about that. We expect at the end of the season. To what extent, I'm not sure. But, like, there's a chance that pressure gets dialed up from a booster, a financial support perspective based on, like, I had this conversation with someone in the program a week or so ago that it's going to get worse. Like, it likely going to get worse. Like the fan angst and booster angst, like that's going to happen because you have a rivalry game. This is before the Duke loss. You have a rivalry game against Miami and you have a rivalry game against Florida. And you're probably going to be, when you're a 20-point underdog for one, you're going to be an underdog against Florida at home too, probably at this point, because they're playing much better than you.
I can think of a matter-of-fact, blunt way of putting this. Ron Dugans is a guy who certainly should be on a hot seat. Think of the Duke game. If Kentron catches that ball in the end zone, there's a fair chance that FSU certainly is in position to compete for a win, if not winning that game. Hakeem Williams' ball, where he made a move before he truly had the ball, therefore dropping it, and also the Malik Benson drop. If you're going to fire somebody in real time because of returns of a singular moment where you can look at a loss and say a major reason why we took an L in this game beyond 3 turnovers was because our receivers failed to do their job, including one that would have definitely put points on the board and a second one that would have put you in position to put points on the board. That's the kind of example where, like, if you're going to fire a guy, a reactive firing, basically, that's an example of where you do it. And clearly that's not happening. Ron Dugans was still coaching FSU on Monday when we were at practice. So that's why I don't believe it's going to happen in season. Just be like matter of fact of, like, cause and effect type of situation.
And the wide receivers have generally, your drop rate over the last.
They're unreliable wholeheartedly.
It just hasn't been a position of strength. You've been below average more often than not, and just catching the ball.
You're not good at perimeter blocking. You're not good at catching the ball.
And you should, and again, that's another, like, what's the future look like there? You had 3 really good wide receivers in this class. You now have one, and you're going to be battling Georgia and some others for CJ Wiley the rest of the way. And your true freshmen really aren't playing in this cycle. And, your sophomore wide receiver, still developing, but like just had a poor showing against Duke. Point being, though, for me, like, big picture is like there is still there's going to be margin for people to get angrier still. I was like, pissed off as you are this season, or if you're feeling kind of just stagnant or not caring, like, wait till you see what happens against Miami, like what could happen, I should say. Willie Taggart was fired after the Miami game, and those, it was already rolling. The ball was already rolling at that point, but like that is what got him fired ultimately.
Yeah, it arrived a few weeks earlier.
Yeah,
because of the Miami game.
Yeah, that was the final nail in the coffin, the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. Manny Diaz, as Chris likes to say, was also fired because of performance. Ultimately, that was the final straw there too, against Florida State. Like these rivalry games shift the way that people with money and decision makers think about things. And that's what I'm saying. It's like there's still catalyst for stuff to alter moving forward. Zach's yawning, so moving on to another topic.
Half yawn. It wasn't a full yawn.
All right, a half yawn. That's good. Florida's Southern Noel asks, with the changes in the sport as a whole, as well as the ability for analysts to now coach during practice, is there a world where you could see guys like Randy or Odell staying on as analysts?
I think Odell, who's a 3-decade veteran of coaching, would not be interested in that, just based on knowing Odell to a degree. I mean, that's what Randy was before Randy became an on-field coach, so it would be a demotion.
Yeah, but I think the analysts in this sense, Chris, is with the rule change of like analysts not having restrictions, that you'd basically be the on-field coach, but without recruiting.
But you would have to still retain the title, is my point. I don't think coaches who are veteran coaches like that, who have been elevated to a certain role, are real comfortable with demotions. I think if anybody on this staff is going to receive a title demotion, it would be something like Alex Atkins losing the OC tag if they were to go and hire an actual OC. But he would still be on staff potentially.
OC.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So no, I don't think that's how. I don't think most coaches think that way, especially guys who are very veteran coaches, which the two we're talking about there certainly are.
What if it was that, or you don't have a job?
They always find a job. Retreads exist in the sport everywhere. So
Randy Shannon's probably not getting a better job that he has currently, right?
Maybe not better, but like I don't think Randy Shannon would be like, yeah, I'll hang around if you want to do that to me. I don't think that's how he or anybody who is a veteran coach who's coached at a really high level like he has is going to operate in that manner. They get fired and then they go be analysts somewhere else, but they don't get demoted to be an analyst within the organization they're already in. Younger guys might accept that because they're trying to work up the food chain. Older guys, I don't think accept that.
I think more so like big picture, like Zach, is that something that Mike Norvell, like not even a loophole, but like, is that a path that they can go down is to double up at a position that you feel like you maybe you're okay with the on-field coaching, like linebacker, where guys have generally gotten better, but the recruiting has not been good. Like, is that a path that we could see them going down?
I mean, there's value to it. I don't know if that's something that Mike would actually do, but and to Chris's point, like, would the coaches that you're essentially demoting be okay with that? I think that's a case by case basis. But I mean, if the options are go find a new job somewhere else, or hey, stay here and do this role, I mean, there's also security in knowing that you have a role, especially considering the, in Randy's case, like the we've talked about at length just how bad the linebacker recruiting has been when he's been here. Like that, there is value in knowing that you have a spot to coach at, like, and with the new rule of allowing these guys to essentially be on field coaches without the title. I think there is value on both sides to that, especially for a guy later in his career. And I think, like, I'll argue, like, against Chris's point, like, I think that it would be harder for a lot of those, like, veteran guys or some of those veteran guys to find, promising roles or promising coaching roles elsewhere. I know they probably can, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere at the level of, a Florida State linebacker coach or linebacker analyst. So I think there is value on both sides. I don't know. Like, I can't speak to whether Norvell would be open to that, or whether that's an idea that he thinks is smart. Well, I guess we'll see. But
Okay, I got a couple more questions, and we'll get out of here. JJH10, Chris kind of touched on this, but I want to dive into it. Does Norvell need to give up play calling and become less involved in the offense? If not, does he need to hire a better GM, OC, and title only, and DC to better assist him in the talent acquisition process? So I find this interesting because I think we'll see from the offseason moves, whether it's Mike with play calling and his role in the program, whether it's with the coaches he lets go, and what kind of coach he brings in to replace them, or if it's someone front office wise and you bolster that area of your program, there's going to be like an admittance of what you thought you failed at. And that is not going to mean that's a correct assessment. That's just going to mean that's, your actions are going to speak there. But, like, at a certain point, like, if you're looking at the offense, guys, and it's one of the worst offenses in the country, and it's going to be one of the worst offenses in Florida State program history, and that's predating Bobby Bowden. Like, is it like, where's the blame going to end up going? Is it going to be Mike as a play caller? Is it going to go with your assistant coaches and the development of players in the talent acquisition side, or is it going to be that talent acquisition side with the coaches, and then transfer portal and what you did with your front office and bringing in guys on those calculations? And I find that to be really interesting. So, in the context of with what Mike's going to do, like, what, based on this question, like, would give up play calling allow him to do, and where do we think, like, he ultimately, I guess we can't predict the future here. I guess let's just talk about what him giving up play calling would look like, and what that would allow him to allocate his time to do differently.
I mean, offensive play calling demands a great deal from whoever does it. For a head coach to do it, it demands a great deal, obviously, because his hand's in every cookie jar. I'm of the opinion I don't think Mike will give up offensive play calling. I just don't think that's his DNA. I don't think that's what he wants to do. He's obviously had a great deal of success previously as an offensive play caller throughout his career in different capacities at different schools and different jobs with different personnel. And this year obviously is not that. But I do think there's a degree of, if he's not going to give up play calling, it demands for him, from a CEO perspective, have better people around you where you don't have to make up for their deficiencies. And that's both in assembling the talent, roster management, and that's also in coaching the talent day in, day out, and in games. It's got to be better. Because if it's not, you can't be the offensive play caller, the head coach, and make up for those deficiencies. It's just too much to put on a single individual. It doesn't work. It causes you to neglect other things or burn out. So,
Yeah, I guess I'll speak to some of the like neglecting of other things. Like I think him giving up offensive play calling and all that comes with that, the prep that you have to go through as a head coach while also being in that role is a ton. And it would free up time for him to be able to handle other parts of the organization in which, you know, a head coach should be handling. And I think, you know, with him being so preoccupied in that, you know, offensive install, offensive game planning for every game, you know, and that goes all throughout the offseason, like that takes up a lot of time that he could be putting towards, you know, talent acquisition and other CEO type roles as a head coach. Like they're, you know, fundraising, getting involved in making sure that, you know, the NIL negotiations with your roster are sound, especially in those portal windows like that. Those are all important things that I think he could be spending more time on. But because of the role that has as a head coach while also being an offensive play caller, it kind of prevents him maybe from or causes him to neglect in some of those areas. And I think that would be valuable to him. To Chris's point, I'm not sure that I believe that it's in his DNA to give up offensive play calling, considering, you know, it's different from like a Willie Taggart giving up offensive play calling because there's proof of concept, right? Obviously, this season has sucked for them offensively, but there's proof of concept for years and years and years that Mike Norvell's offense has worked at a high level. So I would be doubtful that he would, but I could 100% see the value in it, especially considering the predicament they're in where they need to get this turned around quick or he's going to lose his job.
And then like the pantheon of problems, like there's been, I know, frustration with the play calling, especially in the beginning of the year. Like it just didn't make sense, right? Like how it was this, you're afraid to throw the ball the first game, and then that's all you did was throw the ball the second game. And there was this like disjointed of just not knowing what you had. And but in general, like you have a offensive line performing terribly. You have one of the highest drop rates in the country. You have quarterbacks who are committing multiple turnovers each game. Like at a certain point, like there's just nothing that you can call that's going to be effective. And like how many times have they schemed something pretty much wide open or just had a good numbers situation and guys just aren't executing?
Oh, yeah.
So
They've shit the bed in that category a ton.
Massively. And so like that's, if you're moving Mike off of play calling duties, to me, I think the emphasis then is because it's allowing him to put more time to other things, whether it's him having more hands-on with evaluation or overseeing the development of other position groups, something like that. Like I think in the tier of problems, like play calling to me is a lot lower on it because, as Zach said, there's this proof of concept. Just this year, like I think your talent or development have really hindered you more than anything else, frankly. And so those are the areas that you need to focus on. Now, whether him stepping away from play calling duties would allow him to allocate time better to those things, like that's the appeal to me. So yeah, and there's some like interesting, like we've mentioned Brennan Marion. Like if you do decide to go with an offensive coordinator, like that's one who makes sense. Pitt's offense is currently like a top 10 one in the country. What's Bell's first name, Chris? I know
Cade.
not Cade.
Kerwin's son.
So Kerwin Bell was a head coach at Valdosta State, a really good Division II program for a long time. His son's currently the OC at Pittsburgh, first year there, and it's been
Kerwin's at Western Carolina now, if I remember.
As the head coach.
I'm not positive.
Because he went down to USF for like a year or two to try to turn that around as an offensive coordinator. It didn't really work out. But his son, who has ties to obviously South Georgia, I think they're from Gainesville initially, so Florida.
They're from Mayo.
Mayo?
Yeah, which is a small little area over towards Gainesville, yes.
He's
what, Zach?
Of course you know that.
Well, Allison Posey of WCTV and me were having this conversation. She obviously dealt with him a great deal at VSU.
Great name drops, Chris. Good job. Anyways, he's sub 40 years old. And so there's people out there who I think would be, guys who would make sense with either connections regionally or to Mike Norvell, who would Florida State would be considered a step up for you from a prestige perspective. If that is a route you decide to go, and that would maybe be an infusion of talent and whatnot.
There's also a cheap sales pitch with a new OC of you can sell, oh, he was here and they did this last year and they were really good at it, and you don't have to talk about what FSU did offensively.
Yeah, that's what
where you basically circle
that's the momentum part that's the momentum part of it, is you can kind of sell something because you don't have a whole lot to sell right now, and you don't have really good sales people on the coaching staff in general. So it becomes kind of important to go ahead and do that. All right, last question. This is from Matt and Skeet. What positives from this team can be taken into next season?
Well, you're losing your kicker and punter, and they've been awesome.
They have been awesome.
I don't know. I'm struggling. There's not a lot of good fun. Maybe they figure something out in the last 5 and play some form of better football. Not necessarily wins, but just better version of themselves. Protect the ball, some form of efficiency offensively, things like that. It's a building block. They really need to beat Florida. I'm always a big believer that how you play in your last game before you go into the offseason has a carryover effect.
Bobby was huge on that. I remember that was a Bobby Bowdenism of that last game was.
So to me, like, beating Florida is sort of a essential one to help the sanity of the fan base and some of those who cover the program, but also 2, just because it does have the carryover effect to the offseason because you're probably not obviously playing in a bowl.
Yeah.
Good job, Zach. Why were you okay? No.
I was thinking. I think
he's wiping his nose. What's happening? What's happening right now?
I think
don't ignore it. Oh, no, more silence. Good.
I don't know. Like, there's just not much to talk about, right? Like, you look at every positive thing about this season. It's like, okay, your best offensive player is Lawrence Toafili. He's gone. Your best 2 players overall are probably your punter and kicker. They're gone. Like, yes, I think the young linebacker play has been good. Boom, there you go. Like that.
Randy.
Wow.
No, like that's one of the units that's not been consistently bad for you, which is encouraging. Like I'm very encouraged by that. But then you got like, I think like some of your young DBs you feel good about, and how they're going to develop offensively. I mean, the young receiver class, try to keep as many of them that you feel good about on the roster, and they can be something. Cam Davis, when he's healthy, I think he's a pretty solid player for you at running back. Obviously, they thought so with how many snaps he's getting as a true freshman. Yeah, I mean, those are kind of the positives that I could see, helping you in the future.
I'm looking at the numbers right now. Pat Payton only has 11 quarterback pressures this year.
Yeah, Duke obviously got rid of it quickly. He didn't do a whole lot in the Duke game. He's had a couple games where he's turned it on to a degree. The best guy up front for them is Ben Farmer.
And he won't be here next year, most likely. Right. Yeah, that's probably a guy who's going pro. So, all right. Well, this has been fun. Have you guys had fun?
A blast.
Yeah, you were rubbing your nose. Oh my God, we went through the entire podcast. We should give a shout out to our sponsors.
Chattanooga Whiskey.
Chattanooga Whiskey. There is not enough Chattanooga Whiskey in the world right now. They are distilling it and distributing it at a high rate. It's all throughout the Southeast, but I don't think I get my hands on enough Chattanooga Whiskey to possibly justify getting me through this season. But in all seriousness, it is an amazing product. They do a great job with pretty much everything that they put out there is really great. Their experimental line is really cool. They're always trying out different stuff. Like their 111, it's a gold standard for a cast strength, affordable whiskey. So Chattanooga Whiskey supports people who support us. It is legitimately a really good product. And then Buyer Sonone is sponsored by
the Turner Group.
Colin, Amy Turner. Best of the business at finding people places where they want to live. That's what realtors do, correct? Sorry, Colin. Listen, if you're in Central Florida or really throughout the state of Florida, Colin, Amy Turner can help you get where you want to go, quite literally. If you're looking to buy or sell a home, They can get you through that process, very well connected, but it's a smaller agency to where they can also give you, hands-on experience and help you directly, where you won't feel like just like another number as well, which is a really important part of the home buying process, because sometimes that can happen. You want realtors who are going to be very communicative and work hard for you, and that's what Colin and Amy are going to be able to do all throughout the state. They have someone up in Tallahassee, if that's something you're looking to do, is go ahead and maybe I was going to make a coaches buying or selling homes. I'm not going to do it. All right, for Chris Nee, Zach Blostein, I'm Brendan Sonnone. This has been On the Bench. We'll talk to you guys next time.